The Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority Board of Directors. Sylvie, will you call the roll? Oh, do you need to call the roll?
Well, do we want to do flags?
Well, you know what, it's right underneath there, and if you would, in the future, just put a double space there, so, and all caps.
Double space.
All right,
Underline,
Highlight
bold.
yellow. Deal.
Alice, would you lead us in the pledge?
Yes, I would be happy to. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Flag salute done.
Check.
You want to call?
I would love to.
Let's call the roll.
Andriotta?
Here.
Broadway?
Here.
Cortez?
Present.
DiMattei?
Here.
Dowden Calvillo?
present.
Howdeshelt?
Here. Jones?
Aye. Wilkins?
Present.
You got a quorum.
All right. So would you take us through the meeting procedures?
Will do. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Agendas are available on the back table here in the board chambers or available on the PCTPA website. If you'd like to speak during the meeting, please direct your comments to the board. If you're here in person, we ask that you come up to the podium as this meeting is being recorded. If you're joining us by Zoom, you can signal you wish to speak by using the raised hand button. If you're on the phone, press *9 and we'll call on people in the order requests are received. If you would like to comment on an item that is not listed on the agenda, please do so under public comment. The Brown Act requires the public have an opportunity to comment on every item on the agenda. We ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes and invite you to consider stating your name for the record this morning. Your time will be monitored. If you're speaking at the podium, a yellow light will turn on to let you know you have 1 minute left to wrap up. For those participating online, you'll hear a beep when you have 1 minute remaining. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Sylvie. Takes us to agenda review. Matt, anything?
No changes to the agenda, Chair.
Great. And then we takes us to item E, the AB 2449.
No action required relative to AB 2449, sir.
Great. All right, next we'll have the approval of the minutes of the September 24th, 2025.
Move approval?
Second.
I'm going to go Broadway Jones. All right. Alice was, yeah, she was a little slow on that one.
It was actually me.
Oh, Amanda.
It wasn't me.
You know, and then there's 2 A's down there, so, you know. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay. The next takes us to public comment. This is the portion of the agenda where we invite the public to comment on non-agenda items. Anyone in the audience? Anyone online for public comment? All right. We'll next move to the consent calendar. These are items that are routine in nature and of no controversy. Anybody interested in pulling anything off of the consent calendar? No. Any member of the public? Okay, we'll take a motion on the consent.
Move to approve. Second.
All right. Moved by Cortez, seconded by Dowden Calvillo. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstentions. Okay. Takes us to our first public hearing, or takes us to the public hearing on our 2025 unmet transit assessment and public engagement efforts. I will open the public hearing. And Mike, I think it's you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the board and members of the public. Just a real quick...
I'm sorry, Mike, let me just make sure. Ma'am, did you want to comment on a non-agenda item? No, it's not the hearing. Okay, we'll have an opportunity after Mike does his presentation. Thank you, Supervisor Jones. All right, thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning again, members of the board and public. Just a real brief presentation on this item. This is an annual process that PCTPA is required to conduct as part of our administrative responsibilities as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. For Placer County, we administer the Transportation Development Act, or TDA, funding program. And that funding program has two sources of funds that are shown here in this slide: the State Transportation Assistance Funds and then the Local Transportation Funds, or LTF. Now, state transit assistance funds can only be utilized by transit operators for transit purposes, such as transit capital purposes or purchasing of buses or equipment and that sort of thing, or even operational support. However, local transportation funds can actually be utilized for other purposes, such as local street and road maintenance. However, only after can those funds be used for other purposes if it's determined on an annual basis that there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet. And so that is when local jurisdictions can claim LTF for other purposes, is after that determination, which is why this board has to make this process annual. Just a real quick overview of unmet transit needs and reasonable to meet criteria. This is actually a criteria that is established by this board. The last update to this criteria was done in February of 2022, and it's a two-part criteria. The first part being the determination of whether or not there are unmet transit needs, which in summary are basically transit services that are needed that do not exist today, or services that are also needed to address Americans with Disability Act requirements. That's the definition of unmet transit needs. The reasonable to meet criteria is also the second factor that staff has to look at for determining unmet needs, and that is centered around whether or not that if a service is created due to an unmet transit need, is it a sustainable service from a financial perspective? Is it something that can be paid with existing finances? Is it something that's generally supported both out in the public sector, but also supported by current planning efforts identified either in the short-range transit plan or the long-range transit plan, transportation plan? And again, will the service be sustainable? Will it meet recovery, fare box recovery requirements for it to achieve enough revenue to support services? Just a little bit of history of some unmet transit needs that were determined in the past. The most recent one being last year. There wasn't an official finding of an unmet transit need because the need was actually addressed before this board made the finding, and that was noted in last year's report. However, during the process, there was an unmet need that was addressed, again, by the city of Roseville, relevant to an area just south of the boundary of the Roseville Aero service, that service was extended to address this need. So that is kind of an example of some of the unmet transit needs that we've seen in the past. Of course, there was one back in 2019 that addressed cross-jurisdictional travel for Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, passengers, and that was something that, again, this board determined was necessary to address before LTF could be utilized for other purposes. So again, this is just a real brief summary of some of the latest unmet transit needs that this board had seen in previous cycles. For this outreach process, staff conducts extensive outreach in partnership with our local jurisdictions. That outreach typically begins in the fall. In this particular case, we had a survey that was launched right after Labor Day on September 2nd. That survey is actually available through the end of this week, or October 31st. And that survey is also available in English, Spanish, and Tagalog languages pursuant to our Title VI requirements. And we do extensive outreach not just with our local transit operators posting flyers and information in their buses, but we also release information to local jurisdictions, to the local governing bodies of our local jurisdictions, where that is presented as information and opportunities for the public to comment. And then, of course, there is some outreach conducted in the Tahoe region where we partner with TRPA as well as Nevada County Transportation Commission to do some outreach in that area for unmet transit needs. All of this outreach, again, culminates in the result of we're pushing people to take that survey, and once we get those survey results, we analyze comments based on the criteria that I mentioned in the previous slide, and those comments then are brought forward to our board with an evaluation or analysis and determination, staff's recommendation, of whether or not there are any unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet, which the board then makes a determination in February for this annual process to be complete. So again, how can people provide us comments? The main and primary avenue is the survey that is available. We encourage people to take that survey if they have not done so already, and that is available on PCTPA's website. Of course, people are encouraged today to provide comments at our public hearing after this presentation. And then at any time, folks can email me or contact me to provide unmet transit needs or potential comments related to unmet needs that we can take into consideration in part of our evaluation process. With that, staff recommends that the board does open the public hearing this morning, and we ask that any members of the public that provide any comment be precise about their unmet needs, specifically which location they're looking at, and kind of the details of what time of day and what types of services they're requiring for their consideration today. And with that, I'm happy to address any questions the board may have before opening the public hearing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I always appreciate how concise and comprehensive you are in your presentation. Any questions from the board before we open it for public? Questions? Okay. We'll open it for public comment.
Here, I guess. Okay. Good morning. I'm Tink Miller. I'm Executive Director of Placer Independent Resource Services, located in Outwood Business Park here in Auburn. We are a nonprofit that serves people with disabilities, primarily seniors, in Placer, El Dorado, and Alpine counties. I have been an active voice for consumer advocacy on transportation since I got here in 1995. And as full disclosure, I participate in many of the activities that staff organizes, the Transit Working Group, the Technical Assistance Committee, the various procedures around meetings on long-range planning. So I have a long history, although I haven't been here in person since pre-COVID, I think. But I've watched you on the internet in the interim time. So I always like to point out in my comments that a lot of progress has been made, and I always like to recognize that. You know, in the past year, for example, with the City of Roseville's transit and their restructuring of their whole routing and scheduling system, their website, their process for people to schedule rides and on-demand services, has really been a huge welcome improvement, and I think that deserves to be acknowledged. Also, some locally here in Auburn, the on-demand service that they implemented has been, as I understand it, very popular and very successful. I know I see folks sometimes in front of the grocery store with their bag of groceries waiting for the on-demand vehicle to come pick them up and take them back home or whatever. So all those things really deserve to be acknowledged and recognized as great improvement. And I believe there's been actually in the current budget an increase in the funding for Western Placer CTSA, which is something I've advocated for a long time because we went through a long period of not having as much funding available to support that. But this is an age-friendly older adult county, formally designated. About 22 or 23% of the population right now are over age 60. Some demographic projections said that by 2030 it could be as high as 30%. That's an upside-down bell curve. You would normally see a 15% of the population in the older adult age range. We're approaching double that. The need to access affordable, accessible public transit is going to increase. Older adults over the last decade or so, in my experience, have been hesitant to use public transit. They weren't sure how, they didn't know how to access it. Sometimes some of the older women would comment they weren't sure they would feel safe. So that's an education process that needs to be addressed in marketing. And continuing the innovation to be responsive. Our outlying communities are currently not served or barely served, Colfax and Forest Hill in particular, because I'm a resident of Forest Hill, so I'm a little prejudiced about that. But some type of shuttle service perhaps that could operate and maybe contracting with some entity in those communities, a church group or organization that could contract with PCTPA and be the operator of that shuttle rather than having somebody driving up an empty vehicle out of Auburn. So those are the things we would like to see, and thank you. I know I'm out of time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I saw Mike furiously scribbling, but he'll, and I'm sure if he's got any gaps in his, or any illegible penmanship, he'll get in touch with you, okay? All right, any other public comment? Okay, bring it back to the Board of Directors for any comments.
Chair, I have a comment. Mike, wouldn't that be, and I don't know, ma'am, if you know about the Seniors First program, about the ride share. I know we do recognize that Forest Hill is an area that we struggle in, but that's really where those smaller, partners, that they come in handy. So I don't know if you have a voice that you can educate your community in, but yeah, thank you so much for your comment.
Just one other thing.
Yeah.
Tink, it's great to see you. Had a chance to get to know you over the years, and we have missed you, so we're glad to see you back here and always appreciate the insight you share with us. So thank you for taking the time, and I'm hopeful we'll continue to see you joining us and providing us with insight on how we can better serve our communities. Thank you.
Appreciate the input, absolutely, thank you. And the advocacy.
When you're done with public comment, I just had a question.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Mike, I was just curious, when you do this survey, what kind of feedback do you get from Sheridan?
We do typically get a couple of comments from Sheridan regarding unmet transit needs. And to be fully transparent, Sheridan has no existing public transit services right now. It has been very difficult from a cost perspective to run anything out there that would have consistent ridership. And so one of the approaches that we've taken, to the point that was made previously by Board Member Cortez, is we've really targeted the Placer Rides program out in the Sheridan area and looked for opportunities where people can get the mileage reimbursement and then potentially that last resort ride benefit. And so the folks in Sheridan that do need that service, I believe right now have that.
Okay, and are they using it?
To my knowledge, they are still actively using it.
Okay, that's
yes.
great. That's good to know. Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Good. Anything else? I'll just note that, Dan, did you?
No, my mic is next, it's like.
Oh, okay. I don't see any mics down there. I see Anthony, Dan, Holly. Okay, well, there we go. I'll just note that the city of Roseville has, advertising the ability to comment on the unmet transportation needs through various social media channels and other things like that. I will close the public hearing, and do we have a motion? No motion, this is just information only, right? And you'll bring it back?
Yes.
Thanks. All right, we'll move to item J, which is the service policy revisions, ironically, for the Placer Rides program.
Yes. So again, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board and public. This item, just to give a little bit of background, the Placer Rides program was officially launched in July of 2021. And prior to that launch, the program actually was called My Rides, and it was a little bit of a different type of structure, where My Rides included a program where we managed volunteers and then we dispatched volunteers and paired them with specific participants to provide services, transportation services for individuals that couldn't otherwise access public transportation or other types of transportation services. But at that time, again, due also to the pandemic and some challenges with funding, the My Rides program was actually transitioned into the Placer Rides program, in which participants select or choose their own driver. And that is a big component of this program and change, because that also lowers some of the liability for the program, and it puts that responsibility on the participant. So the board, this board actually approved that structure and the service policies associated with the Placer Rides program in April of 2021. Again, the program launched in July of 2021. And the current program as it stands today consists of two components. One, the mileage reimbursement program, where this program, again, will reimburse the participant up to 200 miles per month to then give that money to their selected driver. And if they are actively using the mileage reimbursement program, then they get what's called a last resort ride benefit, where the participant essentially, if they for some reason cannot select or find their driver in any given month due to any sort of scheduling conflicts, then we, our program, will schedule a ride on a non-emergency medical transport service party provider to provide that trip for essential purposes. Right now, our partner in this service operation is Seniors First. They are assisting us with administering this program in a turnkey fashion. Bless you. And essentially, the Senior First service agreement that we have will term out in next year. It'll actually term out in June of 2026. And so there will be a request for proposals for a new service provider or an existing one. Seniors First is welcome to apply as well, released in November of this year. So one of the things prior to the actual release of the RFP, which we anticipate actually releasing next week, is we wanted to bring kind of an update to the board for the service policies. Over the last several years, working with Seniors First, we have discovered that there could be some more efficiencies and more clarifications identified in the service policies. And so attachment 1 to your staff report has a track change of all the policies that are being proposed and all the kind of language changes. And then attachment 2 is actually a clean version of that same document. So I just wanted to be transparent with the board in what we're changing. But highlighting on this slide basically is we are looking at some administrative clarifications on policies based on how, again, we've interpreted them, how we've worked with our participants to administer the program over the last 4 years. So you'll see kind of that reflected throughout the document and the service policies. The one thing that we wanted to clarify, again, that was very critical to this program was switching the word volunteer to self-chosen driver. And the reason being is we wanted to make it very clear to folks that it was their responsibility to select their driver. Now, we are happy to, and our program participants have been coached on how they can select drivers, right? They can look at people that they go to church with. They can look at people that maybe in their family that can help them drive. But again, that responsibility is up to the participant to do. The other thing that we wanted to really expand was the definition of what essential trips are, so that we could, again, make it very clear on what types of trips qualify under business, medical, personal care, wellness, and that sort of thing. And so that is spelled out in more detail in the service policies that you see in the track changes. Lastly, one of the things that we wanted to make clear and we wanted to identify, and this is a new policy change that I'm bringing forward to the board today, is the last resort ride eligibility. Last resort is the most expensive component of our program, and that is because we do have to schedule a ride with a third-party vendor to provide transportation services for an individual, and that can come at a cost. And so one of the things that we have been looking at in the administration of this program and making sure that it's the most efficient it can be, as well as providing the most benefit to our riders, is if a person is seeking last resort, we want to make sure that they are actively, first and foremost, utilizing the mileage reimbursement program, which is the I would say, more cost-efficient component of the program. And again, we reimburse at the IRS rate, which is currently 70 cents per mile. So that is still a very good benefit for the individuals. But again, last resort is the more expensive component. And so one of the things that is proposed in these policies is to change kind of the requirements for a last resort benefit to be issued, that the person, again, has to actively be using mileage reimbursement, and that there's some qualifying criteria that defines what is active utilization. And that could be something that's either an averaging of 6 reimbursed trips per month over a 3-month period, or an averaging of 60 reimbursed miles over a 3-month period per month. Again, looking at kind of the average utilization by our participants, we believe this is a fair recommendation based on some of the statistics we've seen and how participants have utilized mileage reimbursement. But again, we want to make sure that we're encouraging folks to actively use mileage reimbursement and only use last resort when they have an essential need, when they cannot find their mileage reimbursement driver. So with that, staff recommends that the board do approve these revisions to our service policies as presented, and that they be incorporated into the RFP that will be released next week for full implementation with the new contract in July of 2026. And the reason why we're not recommending implementation right now is so that whatever contractor we have, whether it's the incumbent or a new contractor that we would select early next year, that there's time to educate the participants about these policy changes with whoever that contractor is between their selection in, I would say, early next year to June 30th prior to the actual implementation of this contract. So that's why the language is in this recommendation as such. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have about these changes, and then we'll go from there. And then I recommend the board's approval.
All right, questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a couple.
Yes.
I have some basic questions, so thank you very much for bringing this forward. Just to confirm, so the vendor that's administrating the program would get the reimbursement for us, so they would basically run like Seniors First runs the program now, and then they put in for reimbursement, and we reimburse them for that. What funds are we using to reimburse?
So all the funds that we typically utilize, the CTSA budget has local transportation funds that are taken off the top, and we also receive some state transit assistance funds too.
Okay.
Those are our primary sources.
State transit and local transportation, LTF and state transit, okay. Great, thank you very much, I just had that, it's a question.
One question, Mike. Why did you guys change it, the request from 10 days to 5 days? Was it not getting done in time, or?
It was to allow us to process the reimbursements
Faster.
and, yeah, to get us, to be able to get Seniors First reimbursed a little quicker too.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Other questions?
A couple quick questions. So, in relationship to acceptance in the program, so it's self-driven. The individuals look to find friends, family that can provide the rides. They submit that. The staff of the program, what is the criteria? Is there specific criteria? And do we know to date, has the process been successful? And do we have a percentage on acceptance versus rejection?
So we do not evaluate their driver. We do not tell them whether or not they can or cannot have a specific driver. If they have a driver, it's up to them to select that. So that is not a determining factor of their eligibility for the program. The only determining factors for eligibility are their age or their income or their disability and whether or not they can drive or not. If they meet any of those 4 criteria, they are eligible for the program. It doesn't matter which driver they select.
Okay. And then the funding source, again, is?
Is LTF and
LTF
STA.
and STA. And is there a specific budgeted amount we have set aside for the program currently, or is it fairly open?
It is determined on an annual basis. We do work with our contractor to make sure that any adjustments in costs are reasonable in terms of the budget process on an annual basis. I would say in this particular year, I believe we're around $550,000 of the CTSA's $2.1 million budget is associated with Placer rides.
Okay. And do we have a process in which we proactively reach out to both those who are riding and those who are providing drives to find out how the program is functioning?
Yes, so we do focus a lot of our outreach and engagement with the participant themselves, so not the driver, but the person receiving the ride. However, I will say that in our outreach of the program and in our bringing awareness to the benefits of Placer rides, especially in areas like Forest Hill, Sheridan, we have done outreach at community centers, churches, other types of organizations that have potential people that are willing to be volunteers. And then again, we coach participants on, hey, these are people you can consider, but again, it's not our responsibility to make that ultimate partnership or that decision. That is the participant's responsibility.
I just think that success of the program relies both on those who are seeking rides, but also those who are providing rides. So if we have hurdles, for example, if the program from the perspective of an individual being reimbursed, as an example, if it's like climbing into their car through the trunk, they're not going to want to participate, which puts limitations on those seeking rides. So I think having a process where we're at least seeking to understand is helpful.
And I'd like to clarify, and you bring up a very good point, we do require, as every part of reimbursement, that the participant submits to the program organizer, the administrator, which is Seniors First. That reimbursement mileage has to be signed off by the driver as well. And in many cases, if there are issues with the driver not receiving their reimbursement from the participant, again, we reimburse the participant, not the driver, but then it's the participant's responsibility to give that funding back over to their driver. We have heard if that doesn't happen, and in that case, we work with the participant and the driver together in some cases, but we do have conversations with the drivers on how the program is working, how it's functioning, again, but it's not our responsibility to ensure that that driver stays with that participant. We do a lot of coaching. And that's, again, part of that liability requirements.
Sure. Okay, well, just all steps possible to help ensure that it's a smoothly functioning program, I think is helpful in identifying hurdles that may be there, I think is helpful. Because again, I think it's a great option, but it only works if it functions for all involved in the process.
Absolutely.
Especially those of us who have been UPS drivers understand the logistics of things. And it's not just the driver and so his or herself, it relies upon a lot of people making things happen. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anthony?
On the standard mileage rate, you crossed it out. Does it have to be in there so people know what the rate is, or do they have to go look it up themselves and say, well, today it's 70 cents, tomorrow it could be whatever, but...
Yeah, every year it changes.
Right.
And so we didn't want to lock it down to one particular rate because we do work with our contract administrator to adjust it every year. And then once it changes, then we notify or update the forms and we notify the participants about that change.
Okay.
So we do notify them. Otherwise, I was going to say maybe just put a link, if you're able to add a link to the language there, and then it's automatically could go to it, so.
That was my next thing. So thank you for that. Great minds think.
Great minds, that's right.
If there are no other questions, I'll open it for public comment.
Tink Miller again. I just want to say that over the years, there have been many incarnations of this type of program, and I think that this is probably the most successful version we've had in all these years. None of them is perfect. Regarding the issue around the drivers and recruiting drivers, helping the individual who needs a driver learn how to recruit and what to say. They feel intimidated by the process. So I think there's an opportunity there maybe in the marketing activities of the organization to help spread the word to the public that drivers are wanted and needed, and that they could maybe set up some kind of a list at Seniors First if they continue to have the contract after the RFE process is concluded. So that I know that the staff there makes a great effort to help the individuals get over the fear of trying to recruit a driver. But it is a little, I think, I don't want to call it a hang-up, I don't know what word to use, but a hiccup in helping those relationships get established and to be successful. So that would be my only advice. I'm totally in support of this program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment here online? Okay.
I do have one question really fast for Mike. So actually just exactly what she was saying, talking about relationships. And I'm not opposed to obviously doing an RFP, that's how things are done. But I am curious as to when you put out the RFP, what are the criteria that you're looking for a new vendor? Because as she just said, so Seniors First is very established here. You know, I think most people don't like change, but especially I think the aging community, it might bring some, you know, frustration or confusion in that. And so I'm just curious, what is it that you're looking for? Because in my thought process, people who are established and are local understand the region, have already made relationships with the community. Are you looking for a lower cost for the vendor? I mean, what is it that you're actually looking for in the RFP?
Thank you for that question. Overall, experience is a big important factor of any potential vendor or partner, I would say, because we do look at this as a partnership relationship, and we always have. Experience is one thing, an understanding of our region, an understanding of all the efforts that we've had in our region for planning, not just for public transit services, but again, planning for these needs outside of what public transit service can serve and provide. So that's an important factor. I would say innovation in some ways is an important factor, understanding how we can efficiently operate the program from the perspective of mileage reimbursement, getting participants their money as fast as we can so that there's no delays there, and then processing, making sure we're not tied up in bureaucracy and that sort of thing. And then lastly, one big aspect too that would be identified in the RFP would be the ability to communicate and have relationships with our participants. I think it's very important to recognize that these participants, again, consist of a unique and transit-dependent population, and so that there has to be a potential partner that can understand how to communicate with that population, understand how to help that population through this process, and then understand how to work with regional partners, not just the transit operators, but other social service agencies, to help, again, deliver and convey and conduct outreach and engagement for this program. So that's really what you'll see in the RFP that'll be released next week.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, take a motion on this item.
I'll move.
I'll second the motion.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those abstained. All right. Thank you. That was really a very, very good conversation about an important program. We'll next move to item K, the revised 2025 Administrative Operating Procedures. Solvi.
Good morning, Chair and board members. The action being requested of the board today is approval of the revised 2025 Administrative Operating Procedures. And once approved, these procedures will fully replace the 2010 procedures. Next slide. A bit of background, these procedures basically serve as the agency's playbook, and they help guide staff in our day-to-day operations. The last update was done in 2010, and since then, laws, regulations, and our own internal practices have evolved. The 2025 update also incorporates federal requirements that apply when we or the agencies that we administer receive federal funding. Next slide. I just wanted to clarify that this update was a team effort with staff and agency counsel, and it helps bring our framework up to date in 5 important areas. First, in governance and scope, we expanded applicability to all agencies that PCTPA administers. Additionally, we clarified the board's role in the RFP process. Second, in financial management, we added a depreciation policy. We updated surplus property and investment procedures and also introduced a use of public funds policy. In contracting and grants, we clarified state and federal compliance, RFP procedures, we added a formal protest policy, and required grant budgets to show the match amounts and their sources. Next, in human resources, we updated recruitment to align with labor code requirements and added a whistleblower policy. Lastly, in accessibility and transparency, we added a web accessibility policy and we updated our records retention policy. And these both will improve accountability and public access. Next slide. So I supplied, what's the word? Supporting materials are included in your packet. And these are a summary of revisions, and this is for a quick reference, a Redline 2025 version, a Clean 2025 version, and a 2010 version for reference. Next slide. So to conclude, staff is requesting board approval of the revised 2025 Administrative Operating Procedures. And this update will bring our framework up to date with current laws, improve financial and administrative accountability, and strengthen transparency. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Great, well, thank you for taking this on. Are there any questions about this revision to a 15-year-old policy?
I just want to say, great job.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Very
that.
thorough.
That's
So
right.
I thought if anybody would appreciate it, it would be Director Dowden Calvillo.
That's why I had to say something. I read them and I appreciated all of them.
Thank you. It's not exactly a page-turning thriller, I know, so I appreciate you.
But Director DiMattei found it captivating
Oh,
and has a question.
Just one on page 2 where, for the exception of board authority exemptions to the RFPs, where it says may be now approved directly by the board as well as the executive director. Is it
well-
either or is it in concurrent?
Actually, basically, we added this because before it was only the executive director. So we added it so if the executive director, for instance, is unavailable or something of that nature, then staff can go to the board and say, we need to move forward with this. Probably it more applies in situations like the county, if there's a health and human services issue and the CEO, for instance, is unavailable, then staff could go to the Board of Supervisors and say, you know, we need to move forward with this, and also in your own jurisdictions, so
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
you bet.
Other questions? I'll open it for public comment. Is there anyone online?
No.
This is important. I'm doing this in the day job, right, where I'm taking a 2014 document that's out of date and revising it and improving it. So thank you for taking on this important foundational document to all these organizations, because you added everything that we are in our capacity. So I will take a motion.
Move to approve?
I'll second.
All right, we got the Cortez, Dowden Calvillo.
Calvillo.
Villo.
Villo.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, and then any abstentions. Okay. Takes us to item L, the evacuation and transportation resiliency study presentation. Corey Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the board. It's good to see everyone. A couple conflicts the last couple board meetings, so it's been a while since I've seen you guys, so it's good to see
You
everyone.
have a beard now.
And yes, I do. So, but I am more excited to talk about our
It's been a while.
evacuation
I'm done.
and transportation resiliency study. So we've been working on this for about the last 6 months or so, and I did want to real quick take the moment to introduce our consultant project manager, Randy Johnson, who's joining via Zoom. He's with DKS Associates. He's going to be talking about the study and some of the intricacies of what we're going to be looking at with e-TERS. But I did want to give a quick overview of what the study is and what we hope to achieve. This is a partnership between PCTPA and Placer County Office of Emergency Services. So we've been working very closely with Dave Atkinson, who's the Assistant Director of OES. He's been a really critical partner in this study.
So we got a Caltrans Climate Adaptation Planning Grant about a year and a half ago for this study. The county is providing local match. And really the need for doing a transportation resiliency study is to look at how weather events like wildfire, flooding, extreme snow, heat is affecting our transportation network. Obviously, as you all know, we're the fastest growing county in the state, and with all that development pressure comes more pressure on our transportation network, especially in situations where it is extremely stressed, like a mass evacuation event. So really what we're going to be doing is analyzing the transportation network from the perspective of what are the pinch points in the network, where can we make improvements to help facilitate evacuation or to improve resiliency against these major disasters, and what kind of projects would help us to improve that resiliency. And that could be anything from, as large as, modifying intersections, putting in signal timing improvements to help kind of flush out traffic. It could be vegetation clearing, or it could be even communication structures between law enforcement, fire, and public works. Before I turn it over to Randy, I did want to mention, so while we are going to be looking at the transportation network and kind of key routes and key evacuation, ways people would evacuate, we're not actually defining evacuation routes. And I think that's an important distinction to make. We don't generally, Placer County Sheriff does not publish evacuation routes in advance, so we are not going to be identifying specific evacuation routes. This is really just to analyze key routes and how can we improve evacuation procedures on the transportation network. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Randy for the remainder of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Corey, and good morning, Chairman and members of the board. So the project began at the end of June, and we kicked it off with our existing conditions assessment. And so we've been working on that throughout the summer and into the fall here. The key components of that are going to be the hazard and disaster event summary, where we're looking at lessons learned from some past events such as the river fire and mosquito fire. We're working through to identify vulnerable communities and do a transportation network assessment. And ultimately, all this is going to get wrapped up into an existing conditions report with a draft coming out here in November. Throughout this process, we've also been working pretty heavily with the community engagement process. I'll touch on that a little bit more on the next slide. And then as we move into the tail end of fall here, we'll be ramping up our stakeholder and committee outreach. That process will occur throughout the remaining duration of the project. We're also just now beginning the more heavy, in-depth data analysis and modeling to assess evacuation constraints and opportunities. Ultimately, the output of that process will be a series of recommendations for transportation infrastructure improvements and operational improvements. This will ultimately get wrapped into a draft study for probably late summer into early fall, and then we're targeting for ultimate adoption by December 2026. Next slide, please.
Hey, Randy, sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just quickly introducing yourself and maybe 10 seconds, some of your
Sure.
studies you've worked on similar to this?
Yeah, so I'm Randy Johnson. I'm a principal at DCAST Associates. I lead our resilience planning group. And we worked on a number of evacuation and resilience plans throughout California and the Northwest. Most recently, and I guess relevant to this area, we've done work in El Dorado County. So very similar terrain and demographics. Working with the EDCDC, El Dorado County Transportation Commission, as well as working with the county, supporting their countywide hazard mitigation plan update. So we're working kind of a very similar process here. So excited to kind of continue supporting evacuation efforts within the West Slope and into the Sierras all the way into the basin.
Thanks, Randy.
So the public outreach process with our project here with the evacuation and transportation resilience study, the outreach is a major component of this. We want to guide this process with what we hear back from the community. So as part of this, we've had branding with the project. You see the project logo in the upper corner. We've developed a project website with a lot of information, and more information as various deliverables are created will be available on the website. But the key aspect right now is our survey. So we're trying to get as much community feedback as we can. So we have an online survey available. The survey will be open through the end of November, so you can scan the QR code here and share this link to get further community feedback. Also part of this is a social pinpoint interactive map. So it's effectively a survey allows individuals to map out their ideas, concerns across the county. So we've been driving activity towards our survey here through a series of pop-up events. We've completed 6 so far. We have 2 more to go. But we've set up booths at the Auburn Fair, the Fowler Farmers Market, Colfax Railroad Days, presented at the Fire Safe Alliance meeting, up in the basin at the Tahoe City Farmers Market, and at the Loomis Fruit Shed event. So these have really been great events to interact with the community and, again, really drive responses to our survey. So we're currently well over 100 survey responses, and we've had over 66 ideas and concerns mapped out through our social pinpoint. Next slide, please. Another major event of our project so far has been our virtual incident command center workshop. So as I mentioned, we're moving into the stage of the project where we're going to be doing more in-depth evacuation analysis across the county. And we really wanted to focus on scenarios that are of most concern to, 1, the community, and 2, the first responders within the county. So we set up these virtual incident command center workshops where we really want this process to be driven by fire, by law enforcement, asking them which events will keep them up at night. So the attendees that we had at these events was across multiple disciplines, multiple departments. We had PCTPA in attendance, Placer County OES, Town of Truckee OES, Placer County CDRA, Placer County Sheriff, local law enforcement, CAL FIRE, local fire, California Highway Patrol, and representatives from the local cities. So this occurred in late September. We had 2 different events, one up in the East County, kind of representing the basin in the northeast corner there. That was held up in Truckee. And then we had a Western event the next day in Auburn. So the key drivers that we're trying to understand here is once we have what are those key scenarios that we want to look at, what are the parameters for those, particularly focused around fire. So understanding the origin locations, the direction and rate of spread, the time of day, the season, the day of the week. All of those types of inputs will determine what the evacuation population is at the time of the event. And then similar to what you might do in a real emergency operations center is we want these teams to work together to determine what the evacuation orders are. So we're going to determine the evacuation zones, the warning zones, the directions, and the timing parameters. Next slide, please. So ultimately, we ended up with 5 detailed evacuation scenarios that we're going to look at across the county. These were 4 wildfire scenarios and 1 flooding scenario with a dam inundation failure. And we're looking at 6 qualitative assessments. And so the qualitative assessments are areas where the population is not quite as dense and we're not likely to have massive congestion from a traffic perspective, but we still have a life safety concern. And so we're going to focus on any potential pinch points or ways that we could better facilitate evacuation through these key routes. Ultimately, this process led to kind of a multi-agency consensus on developing these scenarios, which really helps build confidence on those inputs as well as confidence on the outputs, because everybody really had a stakeholder in putting these together. And then, of course, the bonus is it was a good interagency collaboration on disaster planning. So it's not every day that these agencies get to come together and kind of work through training scenarios like this. So this is really important to help drive our technical analysis as the next stage. Next slide. So again, with the output of that workshop, that leads us into our technical analysis. For those 5 scenarios, we'll be completing traffic simulation modeling. This models the complete roadway system down to traffic lights and turn lanes, and allows us to also capture who is evacuating. So different population groups, households, employees, visitors, and where they're evacuating to. Ultimately, this will give us insights into evacuation bottleneck identifications, evacuation time estimates to clear the evacuation zones, and even resource needs. So where do we need law enforcement to control traffic? And then ultimately, this will be the key process for us to develop mitigation for infrastructure projects. And then I also mentioned the qualitative assessments. Again, it's really what are the key routes in these areas and what can we do to better facilitate evacuations. Next slide, please. Now on the improvements, we're looking at both infrastructure and operational strategies. On the infrastructure side, there's a whole toolkit of solutions that we'll be looking to apply here. Notably, any community that has a single egress route will be striving to provide secondary egress. That's not always physically possible, but where that's not, we'll be identifying where we could further harden those single access routes. That might include shoulder widening, even vegetation management to reduce the fuels to increase any intensity of fires along those routes. Hardening utility poles, so making utility poles more fire resistant to keep them from burning through along these routes. We could also be looking at intersection control improvements for capacity, even trail connection. So we're considering all modes of travel here, and then even looking at technology solutions. So communications and connected traffic signal systems. Can we remotely change signal timing to buy us more time before we might need to have law enforcement in place? Remote cameras to be able to monitor key bottleneck locations, and backup power systems to make sure these systems work during a public safety power shutoff. Operational strategies, again, identifying where we may need resources to control traffic, because we do know that we only have so many resources available from a staffing resource perspective, and we want those resources from a law enforcement side to be focused on going door to door, getting folks out of there. So whatever we could do to reduce those resources is important. And then another aspect of the project that we'll be focusing on, this will be later on in the project, but looking at what resources do we have available for resilience hubs. And resilience hubs are locations and facilities that provide resources to individuals during any sort of climate or disaster event. It could be as simple as a location to provide information. It could be a heating or cooling center during extreme temperature events. It could potentially be an evacuation destination. So there's a lot of different resources and parameters around what is a resource hub. So these will be defined and we'll identify a potential pilot location. Ultimately, all these recommendations will be developed with cost estimates and aligned with funding resources, so we could really have an implementation plan that's focused on grant-ready solutions. So this is everything that kind of gets wrapped into the ultimate evacuation and transportation resilience study, again, which we're focusing to have adopted by the end of 2026. Next slide. And that takes us to the end. So open to any questions anybody may have.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I did want to add one thing real quick to Randy's presentation. Thank you, Randy. So, OES is actually working on several other concurrent planning efforts that are very similar to this. So the timing of this study is actually really good because they're working on a local hazard mitigation plan that looks at, substantially similar topic areas. They're working on a community wildfire protection plan, and of course they're working on the county's general plan update, as well as a number of other cities in our counties, like Auburn, for example. So the timing of this is really good. We're hoping that this study can coordinate with all those efforts, as well as address some state legislation that's come out in recent years about looking at one-way and one-way-out communities and identifying those resiliency hubs that Randy mentioned. So with that, conclude our presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, questions? I'm sure there's a lot.
Thanks for the presentation, that was great. When you had mentioned on page 37 for infrastructure and getting the sides of the roads cleaned up, vegetation management, I know PCWA is trying to work on the same thing, and so is Josh here at the county, to try and get some of those funds to go help clean those up. Will you guys be reaching out to try to get some of those funds to clean up? Because we can go 100 feet, but we need to go almost 200 feet. So to get into fed land or state land that we can't technically legally get into, but get money for that as well to clean it up. Because Forest Hill Road, if that egress got lit on fire, there's no way that those people would get out. It would be way too hot on either side of that road to get transportation out of it. So is that, when you're talking about infrastructure and vegetation management, are you trying to seek some of those funds so we can get it done ourselves? I know Josh has put a program together that we could do it for almost a third of the price to put out the fire, to prevent the fire. So how are you gonna try and secure those funds if we can get those funds to help do that?
Sure. So that is definitely something that we would identify as a strategy in our plan. We as PCTPA would not likely go seek those funds to implement them, but we know the county is a very robust vegetation management program.
Right.
A lot of our jurisdictions do as well, and like you mentioned, PCWA does that as well. So that would definitely be a very critical factor in this. One of the strategies is reducing those fuels along key evacuation routes.
Yeah, if I could quickly through the chair, it's a great question. Yeah, the traditional sorts of grant funds that we seek don't necessarily marry up with these sorts of activities. So this is something that, we'd seek to identify this and then work with the county through letters of support or active engagement to try to help you identify those dollars. But there isn't a really good identifiable funding source that we usually pursue to fit this category of work.
Okay, thank you.
And I was just going to say through the chair, there could be some,
One second.
sorry, go ahead.
And I think what you're suggesting, and I'm trying to recall the slide, make sure you coordinate with folks that you wouldn't typically. You got a lot of OES folks on there. We heard from Gloria Stearns about how economic development is involved in emergency services, and I think PCWA, so you don't create redundancies within the program. Thank you. Thanks, Alice, for letting me spout.
Yes, I was just going to say that there could be some funds in the Fix Our Forest Act that was recently enacted, so that's another way I'm sure the county might be able to get some funds for that.
I guess my question was, I know that we're trying to do it. I don't know if there was something you guys could do to add to that, or like you said, just letters of support and recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, there's been protect funding, there's been state funding for some efforts like this. Most of them have gone to coastal communities about sea level rise, not forest communities. That's something that the Rural Counties Task Force that we're a member of has had some consternation over, but that program isn't in existence right now. That's not to say that next year the state won't identify some new grant program that we could look to tap, but if we look out the next couple of few years, there's nothing on the horizon that we would exactly apply for this category of work.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
How has Union Pacific or the railroads been involved in this process? Have they been?
We have not had conversations with Union Pacific. I think that that'll be a key part of our stakeholder process that's coming on kind of later in the process. We've kind of started working on the data analysis, but yeah, we will engage with Union Pacific.
Yeah, because I mean, fire and flood and avalanches come to mind certainly as emergency.
Yep.
But there are other things that happen. So
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll open it for public comment. No public comment. This is an information-only item. Thank you. We'll have the executive director's report.
Excellent, thank you, Chair. Just waiting for that slide, there we go. Well, good morning, everybody. For those of you who are back in DC with us, good to see everybody again, and it's been a minute for some of us all being together. Just give you a quick update on some of our general grant activity. Something that you all are aware of and approved the item on consent H2 as far as our US DOT build grant in 2026, so we are going to apply for another build grant in next cycle using the Ferguson Group, our federal lobbyist, and working in collaboration with the city of Rockland. We have identified the I-80 Rockland Road interchange as the best candidate for build funding in our jurisdictional area. You know, if some might ask, like, well, why don't we go do State Road 65 again and get another chunk of it? The real short answer to that is there's not another chunk of State Road 65 that's really ready right now that would be competitive. One of the great statistics we heard from James Zanstra back in DC, I wasn't aware of this, but there were over 800 build grant applications nationally. We were one of 30 that got funded, so something we should be proud of, but it also reminds us that we've got to put forward an extremely technically competitive application that Congressman Kiley can support and get behind. And so for next cycle, that will be the I-80 Rockland Road interchange, working with the city of Rockland on that. I did skip over the top bullet. We are still waiting to hear from Build America Bureau at the US DOT on our Regional Infrastructure Accelerator, or RIA grant. That's $2 million without any local contribution needed. That would fund the next work on 65 express toll lanes, likely the AB 194 tolling application and some traffic and revenue analysis. We're just waiting. Rick checks the website every morning to see, so I think we're in a good position, but we'll find out. With the California Transportation Commission Solutions for Congested Corridor Program, Cycle 5, we are about to put out an RFP for the Placer-Sacramento Gateway Plan update, which we got grant funding for. That will do the early planning work to then get projects identified, bundled together, and do the technical analysis to allow us to go apply for SCCP Cycle 5 dollars. So that's something that David Melko will be program manager on, and we'll be releasing here shortly. Moving to the next bullet, as far as CTBG and CMAQ funding, that's that federal funding. This is the first time in our history we're part of SACOG's 6-county federal funding round. We've already had 2 group meetings with all of the member jurisdiction staff, so all of your staff, 20 plus people, we all got in a room together to figure out what projects did Lincoln have, what projects did Loomis have, what projects did Roseville have, so we could put together a comprehensive list of what our requests would be for these 2 categories of funding. Our goal is to bring this list to SACOG and say, here is our absolute completed, vetted Placer County list. Here they are. We're all in alignment. This is what we would like to see funded through your 6-county round. So as they're dealing with all of the issues that they'll deal with in the other 5 counties, we're ticked and tied and ready to go. So really appreciate all of your staff's coordination on that. And we've also then had one-on-one meetings in addition to the 2 group meetings. We'll have a couple more. I think that's going to be due in February, right? The federal round?
Yeah, the current schedule is a call in February. We don't have a date, but probably May, I'm guessing, for a due date.
So we're well ahead of schedule, which is a good place to be in. State Road 65 Phase 1 improvements. This is the build grant funded general purpose and auxiliary lane. We had a consultant team onboarded and kicked that work off. We also attended a teleconference with the Federal Highway Administration, who was working even though the government was shut down. And so we've talked to them, our build grant award, all of the paperwork, everything you need to do to make sure that we get those federal dollars. So that's moving right along. Just as a reminder, we're going to, in 26, be moving through regulatory approvals and all of that, and we'll start construction spring of 27. So that's very exciting. Express toll lanes for State Road 65. We are making progress on the environmental revalidation, and then, looking to one of my earlier comments, future phases of work will depend on whether or not we get that RIA grant funding. If we don't get those federal dollars, we'll have to determine what we want to self-fund for the next phases of that work and what the ultimate timeline of those express toll lanes are. 8065 interchange VE workshop. This is a new item. This is new information to the board. You know, very much like last year after the measure, we talked about a pivot on State Road 65 to have a practical conversation of what we could actually afford and do. We're starting to turn ourselves to 8065, Chair.
Value engineering?
There you go, value engineering. VE, value engineering. Sorry for the acronym. So what is this really? We're essentially going to get together ourselves, Caltrans, and members of the consultant community who have touched or worked on this project over the last decade and say, okay, we have an existing multi-phase, capital-intensive $800 million project that we can't afford. We also have an operational problem. So under this sort of financial constraint, what can we do to 8065 to get it to work better in the near and medium term? And if we ever get to that point in time where we have $500, $600, $800 million, we can get to these ultimate capital improvements. But we have to sort of, you know, bite the bullet. We have to make hard decisions, look at each other, and figure out what can we do with the limited funding. The idea is to then come out of this workshop with a series of projects that we could then bundle and package for grant funding, whether that be state or federal. So actually take the operational improvements or physical capital improvements, align them with funding opportunities, get that alignment, and then move forward on a 3-year package, a 5-year package to start biting off chunks of this project over time. So step one is to get all the smart people together in the room and have this value engineering workshop. And then lastly, I'll just report out, if you haven't already heard, Senate Bill 512, which was passed and moved forward to the governor. This would have clarified procedures around citizen initiatives for transportation use tax. The governor did veto that. In his veto message, he vetoed it, stating very simply that he thought it was unnecessary. So the sponsors of the bill, which was Riverside County and the Self-Help Counties Coalition, felt that there was conflicting information in state law and the state constitution. They wanted it remedied through this bill. The governor's office, through their message, thinks no remedy is necessary. That would have clarified things for these counties and potentially PCTPA if there was ever going to be a citizens initiative inside of our county. With that, that's the end of my report. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
That brings us to board direction to staff. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if I could, Chair, I forgot to mention something. Solvi put down the chair and vice chair rotation on your all seats, because we had a couple of questions about that. So just as we're finishing out the year, moving into the new year, next year, Placer County will have the chair as acting vice chair right now, and then vice chair will be the City of Auburn's representative, and then you can go down the line to see how the rotation is all the way through 2030. But just wanted to get that out to you a couple of months ahead of time in case, as you all are meeting, there's conversations in your respective jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, that's very helpful. All right, I think that brings us to adjournment. Also, yeah, there are informational items in your packet. I encourage you to read those. And there will be a test at the next meeting on December 3rd, 2025. Thank you, everybody.